Okay, hi everybody. So welcome to class this week, and we'll just sort of start with the Heart Sutra here. Homage to perfection wisdom, the Blessed Mother. Thus I've heard at one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajgir in Mass Vulture's Mountain, together the great assembly monks and nuns and a great assembly bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the concentration of countless aspects of phenomena called profound illumination. At that time, also, Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the Great Being, was looking perfectly at the price of profound perfection wisdom, looking perfectly also at the five aggregates being empty of inherent existence. Then, through the power of Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to Spirit Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the Great Being, how should a son of the lineage train who wishes to engage with the price of profound perfection wisdom? Thus he spoke, and Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the Great Being, replied to Venerable Shariputra as follows. Shariputra, whatever son or daughter of the lineage wishes to engage with the practice of profound perfection wisdom should look perfectly like this. Subsequently, looking perfectly and correctly also the five aggregates being empty of inherent existence. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, form's not other than emptiness. Likewise, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are emptiness having no characteristics. They're not produced and do not cease. They have no defilement, no separation from defilement, no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, and no consciousness. There's no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mentality, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no tactile object, no phenomenon. There is no I element and so forth, up to no mentality element, also up to no element of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance and so forth, up to no aging and death, no exhaustion of aging and death. Likewise, there's no suffering, origin, cessation, or path, no exalted awareness, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because there's no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Their minds have no obstructions and no fear. Passing utterly beyond perversity, they attain the final nirvana. Also, all Buddhas reside perfectly in the three times, having relied upon the perfection of wisdom, became manifest, complete Buddhas in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the equal to the unequal mantra, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, since it's not false, should be known as the truth. The mantra of perfection of wisdom is proclaimed Tayata Om Gata Gata Paragata Parasamgati Bodhisoha. Shariputra Bodhisattva, great beings, should train the profound perfection of wisdom like this. Then the Blessed One arose from that concentration and sent to Spirit Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being that he'd spoken well. Good, O son of the lineage, just like that. Since it's like that, just as you have revealed in that way, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra, Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, and the entire circle of disciples, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, demigods, and spirits, were delighted and highly praised what had been spoken by the Blessed One. Okay, let's just do a short meditation here, just to sort of get us ready for the class. So seated in a wide open space, ground like a beautiful lapis lazuli, and ourselves surrounded by all sentient beings. You can think of our mother on our left, father on our right, people we love the most behind us as support, and people we have issues with or don't like as much or have karmic debts with in front of us as objects of our compassion. Now, going out from there, the people we're closest to, friends and family, neighbors, work colleagues, and so forth. And then going out sort of in all directions from all other sentient beings we don't know or not connected with. We can think of people from all over the world with us, the whole natural environment, ecological systems, all different, sort of the animal realm of all different animals, insects, fish, mammals, birds, everybody here. Even if you'd like to add in trees and mushrooms and so forth, kind of like the whole natural environment of living things. And in the spirit world as well, with all the different astral, elemental, and ethereal planes and so forth, all the different beings from the spirit realm are here with us. Celestial beings, gods, and demigods, and countless beings in lower states of rebirth, hungry ghosts and hell beings and so forth. Beautiful dome-like sky above us. And in it, we're just getting in as how we've been meditating the last little while for our Tantra classes. We're going to visualize Buddha Shakyamuni's higher angelic Sambhogakaya form, conquer Vajradhara. a Tantric Buddha. So he's in the sky above us and in front of us, made out of beautiful sapphire blue or blue diamond blue or lapis blue, energy or light. And he's wearing a crown and has his arms crossed at his heart. He's got a bell in his left hand and a vajra in his right, in lotus position, wearing beautiful jewelry and silks and so forth. And a whom letter is at his heart. So let's just get my prayers ready here. Let's take refuge for ourselves on behalf of ourselves and all sentient beings. So we say, I and all sentient beings, until we achieve enlightenment, go for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So just cultivating this refuge in our hearts here. Refuge has two components, as you know, fear of suffering and faith or confidence in the three jewels. So not wanting to suffer, the true sufferings of life and their true origins. And so the true cessations and true paths here in particular, we're thinking of the Dharma jewel in particular being emptiness, mind realizing emptiness. And the Buddha, who is emptiness, like we are too, but in nature, as well as the guide and example of how to do it, and the Sangha, the community, keeping this whole sort of system of teachings going in their practice. That's what we're taking refuge in, just from our heart here. And the awakening mind, through the virtues we collect by giving other perfections, may we become a Buddha for the benefit of all. So everything we're doing today together in our day-to-day lives at each moment may be put towards the enlightenment of all sentient beings, the awakening of all sentient beings, the salvation of suffering for all sentient beings. Now in our hearts now generating the four measurables, so love and compassion, so wanting all beings to be happy and not wanting them to suffer. So joy, and joy of enlightenment in particular, is beautiful, sort of inhuman, beyond human, creative, positive power. And equanimity, sort of balanced, moderate, grounded, open, friendly, caring attitude. And the seven limbs here, we'll just recite for everybody. With my body, speech, and mind humbly I prostrate, and make offerings both set out and imagined. I confess my wrong deeds from all time, and rejoice in the virtues of all. Please stay until samsara ceases, and turn the wheel of Dharma for us. I dedicate all virtues to great enlightenment. Now, before we absorb Conquer Vajradhara into our heart, let's just open our hearts up. One more sort of act of generosity or giving here. The mandala, so the entire universe purified and made beautiful as the Vedic universe of Mount Meru, and the four continents and 8 subcontinents and all beautiful precious things thereof included. You can just say, the ground sprinkled with perfume and spread with flowers, the great mountain, 4 lands, sun and moon, seen as a Buddha land and offered thus, may all beings enjoy such Buddha realms, or such pure lands. We send forth this jewel mandala to you, precious gurus. Om Enam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nirtiyami. So with that, let's just absorb Conquer Vajradhara into our hearts here. Please grant us your blessings of body, speech, and mind. So with this, he starts to get very, very small. Size a sunflower seed, or even smaller if you like. And just like a shooting star coming down, but we can slow him down a little bit. He comes to the crown of our head, enters our crown chakra, and just right in front of our spine, slowly descends. Again, like a falling leaf or just like a slow elevator into our heart and right into sort of our soul mind, so to speak. And once he reaches our heart and our mind there, he dissolves. You can just like dropping a little bit of blue food dye into a big bowl of water instantly dissolves. And just feel that his mind and our mind are one. All the tantric teachings, sutra teachings, the love, compassion, wisdom, and power going directly into us. And you can feel just great spaciousness, joy, and sort of awakeness here. Okay, so just coming out of meditation now. Okay, so let's just take a look at our text, what we're going to be doing today. The chapter we'll look at, it's kind of this section here is just finishing up. This is the last chapter here of the part. What one is this part? Let me stable rule of the teacher, Deity. Yeah, so this you've had part one is just the ground, working with the ground. So there's all sorts of different meanings to that, I think, both in a Jungian sense and a tantric sense, or even in a Mahamudra sense, so to speak. And then the second part of the book here is called the vessel, entering the vessel. This is where we're getting into sort of the alchemical idea, from Rob Preece, the old sort of classic Western idea of, the Holy Grail, or, sort of the alchemical cauldron that we're going to take lead and make it into gold. So this chapter here is on the deity, and it's a great chapter. That nice picture of green Tara here. but I just feel there's a lot in it. So I would really encourage people to actually read this, obviously, chapter on their own. There's only, I think, so much I can talk about today because it'll just, in some ways, it's just a cursory presentation. I am going to read one part just right from the text because I think it's important that I do. I thought it's an interesting thing just on archetypes. But let's get started here. Look at my notes. Okay. Okay, this is interesting. So he starts by saying Jung's one of his main sort of messages in his whole work is the psyche or the mind or the soul's inner disposition always attempts to move towards the healthiest state in any given situation. It's always trying to make itself whole. This is important. This is the function of the self as archetype of wholeness. So capital S self, as sort of our true self, our true nature. Should be or is trying to be whole, right? That's the big Jungian thing. Very different than other uh, like what makes I think Jung in a lot of ways so positive is he always thinks like we're always moving towards greater wisdom, greater wholeness, greater healing. And so the human condition is more of a positive thing. One of my friend's husbands was a Jungian psychotherapist in Vancouver, and it was always funny. How did he say, like, most psychoanalysis, traditional psychoanalysis is kind of negative, right? Like, and so, whereas there's a lot of negativity in Jung, but most of it's positive. It's kind of like a bit of a happy ending. Whereas if you look at someone like Freud or something, it's just there's so very little that we can do. It's sort of more of a negative reading of human nature. But anyway, so he says the self has a fundamental homeostatic intention that enables individuals to adjust and integrate life experiences in a way that always attempts to remain unified and whole. So we might be unconscious of this capacity of the self to maintain wholeness, but once awakened, it becomes central to every aspect of our lives and gives it meaning and value. So once we sort of realize, obviously from Jungian and even Dharma point of view, that we're on a journey towards wholeness, towards healing, everything sort of becomes a part of that journey. Everything sort of structurally, the elements make sense in terms of the whole in this case. It's a lot like I also like Viktor Frankl's logotherapy, if you remember his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, in the sense that if, being influenced more from an existential point of view, once you have a quote unquote existential life project, everything in your life fits into that journey that way, sort of giving it meaning. Who are you trying to be? What are you trying to do? Jung, of course, is looking a little bit more deeper in this sense, trying to make whole, trying to heal ourselves. But he says, but our habitual failure to listen to this inner call towards wholeness leads to endless confusion and suffering, obviously. The experience of emotional and physical problems can be seen as reflections of imbalance of the body and psyche. It can also be seen as symptoms emerging as the psyche to adjust to life's traumas. So, of course, from Jung's point of view, we can see all of our suffering in terms as messages uh, of healing messages, attempts to make ourselves whole, attempts to point us towards this direction of sort of a healing journey. And the more we ignore these messages, sort of the worse the suffering gets. It's the same thing when you're doing any therapeutic qigong, which I studied for years. They teach you to see sort of illness as a way, as sort of a wake-up call from your nervous system, as sort of showing that something in your soul or spirit is out of joint or not being heard properly, not being integrated properly, right? So we could sort of see, even from a Buddhist point of view, really in the big picture, samsara is a similar kind of thing. If we're looking at as samsara as being almost sort of the terrible high school classes that you can't get out of until you pass them. In the bigger picture, it is kind of a journey to enlightenment. And all of our sufferings in the big picture, if we look at it sort of almost like a Lojong or mind transformation point of thing, is these are all messages, these are all teachings, these are all sort of educational components to our journey to enlightenment, right? And it's the same thing as long as we're in a state of complete ignorance about everything, this sort of dualistic thing where it's us against the world, we're the big victims, everything's just happiness, everything's meaningless and absurd. We can't take advantage of these things. We can't see them as symptoms. We can't see them as signs or messages. We can't make ourselves whole. So Jung says here, symptoms are the psyche's way back to wholeness. They are sources of chronic suffering only when we are stuck and cannot move through them or when we're ignoring them. So if we don't listen, they get louder until we take notice and change. And this is the class way of dis-ease, in the sense of ease or things working out for us, things being at peace, being whole. If they're not paid attention to or whatever, then it's dis-ease or we're sort of off balance that way. This one way you can see it when we talk about suffering or dukkha, which is the old Sanskrit or Pali word, is that the uneven axle of your chariot or the alignments off the car. You let go of the steering wheel and the car goes into the ditch. Um, the same kind of thing, disease or whatever, are the symptomatology of our suffering is, yeah, things aren't working, they're off, the alignment's off. So we can see this as actually life correctives, in the sense that we're getting signs in and of our own life on our own journey to make ourselves whole. It shows that we can be made whole. I mean, ironically, the Four Noble Truths or Arya Truths, truth of suffering, truth of origins, shows you the very fact that suffering has a cause shows that there's a way of getting rid of it. The fact that we have um, disease, suffering, dukkha, or whatever shows that it doesn't have to be this way. These things are caused, these things are produced, they're signs or symptoms, which means we can heal them or eradicate them. So when we fail to respond to Psyche's archetypal intent, the gods become diseases, as Jung says, which I think is a great quote. That's a famous quote from Jung, is that the gods themselves become the diseases. In other words, suffering itself can become sort of a medicine if we use it the right way, right, as a way of healing. But if we just keep ignoring these things, then they become a problem. So, yeah, so I like this. Jung says the process of individuation or sort of enlightenment in his system, becoming your true self, sort of becoming whole. He says this whole process, we have to trust in the self's pull towards wholeness. There's kind of a direction to healing, a direction to our journey. And so Rob Preece says, in a similar way in Buddhism, we have to open to our own Buddha nature. So we can, on a Buddhist point of view, we can almost see that our own Buddha nature itself is trying to reveal itself. We're trying to wake up. It's almost like the process itself is tilted towards our enlightenment. And that on one way of looking at it, we can see that our true, we can't really talk about true selves, but in the sense that our Buddha nature is always already there and always already in the process of revealing itself, right? So on one level, we have to see our whole journey is that we're purifying negativities, creating all this merit for this to happen. But on another sort of selfless way, it's almost happening by itself, you could sort of argue. So, Tantra is gradually awakening seeds of our innate wisdom as a source of health, power, love, and peace that then, through every aspect of our lives, sort of become manifest. We can then engage in life more fully and confidently because we're in relationship to our true nature personified in the Tantric deity. To practice Tantra successfully, Rob Preece says, we must also begin to respond to the innate disposition to unfold towards wholeness. So this is it's interesting. You get all these funny timelines in a sense. I remember Venerable Tenzin Palmo said this, where she said it's a very Kagyu sort of Shentong view of emptiness way of looking at things, where she said it's not you, like let's say Matthew, visualizing yourself as Green Tara, trying to bring Green Tara. It's Green Tara who's forgotten herself, who's appeared as Matthew. You know what I mean? Like in a sense of, which is a cute way of looking at it, right? So if that's the case, your divine nature is always already in the process of becoming manifest. It's always already been there. It's just sort of becoming manifest in time. So it's the same thing that's, from Jung's point of view, that we're in this process of becoming whole, right? This sort of, our life is this sort of inner journey or sort of story for this. So Ron Priest says, in Buddhism, we don't have a self with the selflessness. This is the whole point of the teachings on emptiness. But Buddhism conceives the potential for wholeness to be personified in a symbolic form of a deity. So what's important is to be introduced to a deity that then embodies the innate enlightened potential. So the guru or a teacher initiates the relationship to a powerful archetypal forces that then transform the student as they awaken in the student's life. The seeds of transformation and healing are present within us, but need to be awakened through the process of initiation and practice. So the deity or tantric deity itself is the gateway or bridge between these two aspects of reality, the sort of suffering state we're in now in a Jungian sense, and the state of wholeness or individuation, or from a tantric Buddhist point of view, the state of sort of duality and suffering and samsara, to sort of this enlightened, non-dual divine state. So I do like this. So the deity itself, this is why we talk about Tantra as being taking the end goal into the path right now. So the path itself is taking the final result as sort of the causal process to bring about the final result itself, if I could say. So by visualizing ourselves as always already enlightened in a pure sacred universe, just by doing this ends up creating that universe itself, right? It's kind of like a snake biting its tail that way. That's what we're doing, as we've talked about before. If we're always self-generating as a deity in a purified sacred universe, we start to behave as a deity. We start to see everything as this universe, which then deploys or manifests it in real time, right? So I like this how Rob Preece says that the deity itself is the bridge between these two aspects of reality. So even from a Buddhist point of view, when we can talk about the world of appearances and forms or conventional reality, and then the empty, spacious, non-dual nature of reality, which is ultimate truth or emptiness, the deity itself bridges these two truths, ultimate and conventional truth. So usually when we're doing work in sutra, these two things, ultimate truth and conventional truth, emptiness and world of karma, even though they're together, you sort of end up approaching them separately. We meditate just on emptiness, or we study karma, this and that. But when we're doing Tantra, the meditations themselves join these two aspects at the same time. So that's what makes Tantra so powerful, is it ends up allowing us to really realize the truth of the unity of karma and emptiness, of conventional and ultimate reality, just by doing deity yoga. Right? So Rob Preece says the deity is the symbolic aspect of forces that arise on the threshold between two dimensions of reality, the two dimensions of awareness. Form and emptiness are interrelated as a dynamic of creative manifestation in every moment. The deity stands on this threshold as an expression potential for creative manifestation that can inform our life in every moment. So we can talk about the two kayas. In other words, the deity, all Buddhists have the Dharmakaya aspect of sort of the enlightened mind meditating or realizing emptiness, as well as the other two bodies, the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya, or the sort of angelic body and then manifestation bodies. So these things, the Dharmakaya and form or Rupakaya, for a Buddha are exactly the same thing. So, but what we're doing is when we're doing our deity yoga, we're meditating on emptiness. Everything, the sort of whole creative, imaginative potential depends upon emptiness. The fact that because things are empty and projections of our mind, we can create reality in and through our imagination, through manifesting things through energy or karma. But at the same time, things are projections or empty. So we can see sort of as we've spoken about before in other courses, the unity of karma and emptiness, or emptiness and the imagination. Tantric practice deity yoga by self-generating as a deity, visualizing beautiful, pure, sacred things, depends upon emptiness as a manifestation of emptiness at the same time. So for a normal person, remaining on this threshold of awareness, Rob Preece says, is unlikely because our minds are too preoccupied by gross dualistic conceptions and bound by a solid sense of self-identity. Without training in meditation, our minds don't have the capacity to settle into subtle and clear state of awareness to be open to the threshold between the two levels of truth. So Dharmakaya becomes translated in an unconscious ground of being, like Jung's notion of collective unconscious. So if you notice in like a lot of ways, what I like about this chapter, he's sort of showing from a tantric point of view where you've got the unity of emptiness and form or emptiness and karma between sort of a mind meditating emptiness and then the mind sort of manifesting itself, its empty quality as sort of a divine, beautiful, sacred deity in a purified, sacred universe. He says that we can look at this from a Jungian point of view on the relationship between the unconscious sort of the collective unconscious and the personal consciousness. So this is the famous chart you can probably see here, where it's a sort of a good chart to have. You've got sort of the ego and self and the collective unconscious here. So the unconscious for Jung, the ground of being or collective unconscious from which all these archetypes or sort of the movement to wholeness manifests. Then you've got your personal everyday ego. And then what bridges is this sort of the capital S self or higher self, the self that will become unified, that will become made whole, that will become healed, the self that's individuated at the end of the alchemical process. So the little line here of manifestations you can see from the collective unconscious into the ego. And then once the ego is healed, you end up being the capital S self or individuated self. So what uh Rob Preece is saying is that by analogy, we can talk about the same thing in Tantric Buddhism. The grounder being or unconscious, we can say is like emptiness. You've got your regular everyday ego here that's in samsara, but the capital S self that becomes individuated is the deity, which bridges the two. And as the process moves forward and the capital S self becomes more and more healed, more and more whole, it becomes the whole thing. It becomes individuated. So it's the same thing in Tantric Buddhism. The more practice we do, the more we focus on karma and emptiness and do our tantric practice, this deity, which is the bridge, ends up becoming individuated. It becomes sort of taking over the whole. So we have a unity of the unconscious and the conscious, right? So he says here, a normal inability to experience subtle awareness of Dharmakaya, or the enlightened mind of Buddha here, is in the chart sort of personified on the chart here by the unconscious side, the transpersonal outside beyond personal, which is mysterious. Jung's a dark background of consciousness. So in other words, he's trying to show Jung, Rob Preece by analogy. We can talk, it's not the same thing, obviously, right? But Dharmakaya, or this ground of being, ground of emptiness, is sort of in a similar way, is sort of similar to Jung's sort of collective unconscious here. This gives rise to manifestations, unconscious manifestations, a world of archetypal forces. So I'm just going to try and make this a little bit more simpler here out of my notes. Yeah. So I guess I sort of just saying there, these more of my notes here. Yeah. I just don't want to make things sort of much more confusing here. But I guess sort of showing that diagram, what allows us, from a Jungian point of view, and I'm not a Jungian psychotherapist, but I'm just saying that movement of individuation from the collective unconscious to the conscious that ends up sort of alchemically becoming unified in and through what he calls the self. Um, that's done archetypally. So this is the whole thing in Jung's system is the unconscious makes itself those teachings of the collective unconscious. How that alchemical process works is through the process of archetypal images or symbols. That's what allows us to sort of get out of our individual limited ego and more into this sort of cosmic way of seeing things. It's what allows ourself to expand. So I guess you could say that what Rob Preece is trying to say is that the tantric deity functions in the same way, which is why there is this archetypal dimension to tantric deities like the one behind us. That's why we're trying to sort of use these as our main focus of meditation. The very fact that they have these archetypal dimensions expands our sense of self, expands our awareness, gets us outside of our worldly, sort of mundane, profane sense of ego that's sort of within samsara here. Um, yeah, so I'm just trying to see here. So I just have for my notes here. This dialogue is the sort of dialogue of the unconscious and conscious here is the process of individuation as it is expressed through archetypal things like dreams, dream work, art, writing, and other creative processes. The relationship between the ego and self deepens as we open to the influence of the sort of bigger self. Jung says the self will always remain within the unconscious as a kind of divine other, and the separation between ego and self will always exist. So, from a Jungian point of view, because it's this remains very much within human condition. I mean, this is where the limitations of Jung, and again, not that this is a bad thing, but Jung didn't believe, obviously, he's not talking about Tantric Buddhism. He's not saying through Jung, his own sort of psychotherapy, that you can become enlightened and this divine being that is outside of, at least not that I know of, maybe he did, but sort of outside of life and death, outside of suffering, this kind of thing. It's like for him, as this therapy, this alchemical process is helping you stay or sort of become more human, so to speak, and suffer less in your life. But there's still always these sort of fundamental dualities between the collective unconscious and even your healed, made whole alchemical self. We're not in a state of absolute non-duality or sort of divine nature at the end of a Jungian process because it's psychotherapy. This is why I like to say that there's sort of, if I can make a fashionable 1960s philosophical thing, sort of a quote unquote structural sort of anti-humanism that you get in Buddhism, in particular in Tantric Buddhism, because the human is a structure that you're overcoming, getting beyond. At the end of Tantric Buddhism, you are becoming like an angel. You're leaving your whole human structure behind. It's not about becoming just fully human or a healed human. It's about surpassing that altogether and becoming a different form of life. That's an important thing to see. So that's where Jungian psychotherapy and Tantric Buddhism do depart, is one reaches a limit, a very human limit, which is great, wonderful, not taking anything away from that, but the other one actually surpasses that limit there. Yeah, so this is sort of a difference here, and it's sort of an important difference. So that's why, in a lot of ways, Rob Preece, even though he's Tibetan Buddhist, we're using these Jungian teachings as analogies to help us understand Tantric Buddhism better. However, they are not the same thing. Okay, so it's important to see that there's, I would argue, a little bit sort of obviously a greater and more profound and sublime product you get at the end of Tantric Buddhism. You get a real alchemy, not just a symbolic alchemy. Like I think there is a real alchemy in uh, sort of Jungian psychotherapy, but the point is it nevertheless stops at a human limit. Our alchemy goes all the way to the bottom when we're doing Tantric Buddhism. We literally change reality itself. We change ourselves itself. We get out of this complete. We get out of the human condition altogether. So I just wanted to just finish with a little bit of thing. I want to finish on an open-ended, ambiguous note here because I don't think these the answer here, there's any real sort of set answers to this. I just wanted to read sort of the last passage here, which is at the end of the chapter, after talking about how the deity functions in Tantric Buddhism, the sort of process of individuation for the self, similarities and differences. Rob Preece on page 51 has a section here called Eastern Deity, Western Psyche. So I just wanted to read this because it's so good. Okay. And this is, I will say that things have changed over the last few years. This is 2006, but this is, so this is book's 20 years old now. But it was actually originally entitled The Alchemical Buddhist. So it's a much older book. So I actually think the culture around this is different now, even since COVID. So you're looking even at 2020 on a spiritual level around the world, things have changed. So this is very much written from a 1990s perspective, and I think we've actually gone further in this in a good way and a bad way. So I just wanted to get people thinking and talking here. Okay, Eastern deity, Western psyche. Many people today seek out some form of spiritual path that includes working with archetypal forces. When our own culture no longer provides necessary myths and mysteries for transformation, however, we will often find ourselves responding to those from elsewhere. Consequently, a number of people explore paganism, shamanism, Hinduism, Kabbalah, and other traditions is increasing. Just have to check one thing here. Okay, yeah. Although the Tibetan tradition of Tantra does not suit everyone, and there's no reason why it would, many Westerners respond to its practices with great enthusiasm. It is not unproblematic, however. A question I find myself asked time and again by those who encounter the tantric path is, how useful to Western minds are deity forms born out of an Eastern culture? So I will just have one little before I keep going. In the early 2000s, I had a few flights to New York City, had layovers there, and in the East Village, there was a theater, experimental theater, and I saw it twice actually. I brought a friend of mine who came from an evangelical Christian background. Let me tell you, that maybe wasn't the best idea, but it was a play a local theater group put on about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodro, Great Hearing, or Great Liberation Hearing the Bardo. And what they were looking at, this is like 2002 or something, is uh, are how do we understand the Tibetan Book of the Dead? Like, how archetypal is it? Like, in other words, so they had a whole write-up on that. So what they showed is they had this one woman that has a heart attack. She's the actress, and then she meets all the visions of the Bardo, what they call the Bardo of becoming, right? So you have all these tantric deities coming to see her, and then I can't remember. I think she gets revived at the end of the play and learns all these things. So what they tried to show is sort of the deities, the five elements, appearing more in a Western point of view. You might have heard about this. I think one of Trungpa Rinpoche's students did a similar thing. He did a whole play about Tibetan Book of the Dead, this sort of experimental play. So it's something similar. So this was called Blue Sky Transmission was the play that I saw. And they had, so what the play was trying to show is that as Westerners living in New York in the early 2000s, if we go into the Bardo, what will it look like? Will it look like the traditional tantric texts with how the deities appear, or will it look something archetypally more in terms of our culture of this day? So they tried to make all these deities appear as they would appear if you lived in New York in 2002 or whatever. So it was very cute and very clever. But I read about this. They might have had a review on it. And the reviewer, if I can remember correctly, was asking Jamon Control III, who passed away. He was a famous Kagyu Lama, died in the early 1990s. But in the 1980s, he was talking to Jamon Control about precisely this. And he said, well, when I die, how will these deities appear in the Bardo? And Jamon Control said, they'll appear exactly how it says in the text. They won't come to you as an American, white American guy, sort of in a way that makes sense to you. They're going to come exactly like they come in the text. So he was, in a lot of ways, in the article, this reviewer was said, I've always been confused by that. And so he was like, I think what these people are doing in the play is a good idea to try and look at it. So this is a good question. Like, and this is a question that Jung always looked at, is that archetypes, there's a universal archetype, but the point is you can't see the universal archetype. It's always cashed out in a way that makes sense to you individually. Now, however, tantric deities, they always say appear exactly as they are. And I think in the Tibetan Book of the Dead thing is one of the reasons we never recognize these deities is because they don't make sense to us without the proper training. So I would sort of agree with Jamon Contras. I think probably these deities do appear in a way that makes sense, um, only if you've got tantric teachings and recognize them for what they are. So I always give the example that famous Catholic saint Padre Pio was a famous Italian Catholic saint in the mid part of the 20th century. He might have died after World War II. I don't know, but a friend of mine was telling me about there's a big Catholic website devoted to him. He's this famous Mahasiddha. He had CDs and could do miracles. And this famous, I think he might have been a Franciscan, but he read one thing where Padre Pio, when he was younger, had this divine vision where this angel came to him, and the angel had three faces, six arms. I'm trying to see Christine's Vajrakalaya picture over here on our shrine, wings on fire, and had in two hands a big knife a three-sided knife that he threw at Padre Pio that punctured Padre Pio's heart, went right into his heart, and he was filled with all this bliss and love and luminosity. So of course my friend's like, dude, it's Vajrakalaya, but the point is, it's like this famous Tibetan Buddhist Tantric deity. But Padre Pio, being an Italian Catholic guy in 1920 in Italy, wouldn't know who Vajrakalaya is, obviously, right? He just appeared as this kind of angel. So isn't that interesting? Archetypally, you see that this is sort of something we have to work at. So I just wanted to add this. So Rob Preece, going back to the text here, says, how useful the questions to Western minds are deity forms born out of an Eastern culture. Usually this question arises when people are struggling to relate to forms that feel alien. And there's often a sense that these forms are not personal enough or that they do not fit our Western symbolic world. This is an extremely complex question to answer because their experience is so individual. Some find they can relate to these forms with relative ease, and faith and devotion grows naturally. Others struggle with the forms and may be unable to make a connection. Does this mean that the deity forms should be changed and made more culturally acceptable to Westerners? One opinion is that these forms are traditional and unchangeable. Others say this is open to interpretation, and that we need to relate to the essence of the form, not to its cultural coloring. We may be tempted to search for a Western equivalent or to try to form a synthesis, like merging Christ and Chenrezig and seeing them as being the same nature. It may be useful to make such links, but this does not address the central problem. It's worth considering the difference between the archetype and its symbolic representation, the archetypal image. Jung recognized that an archetype will emerge in forms that are both culturally and individually flavored. The same archetype may emerge in different cultures, but in very different forms, and it may be colored by individual differences. Jung suggested that what gives an archetypal form its power and numinosity was an inner response, an inner condition. When this is missing, we feel little relationship to the form, and it has little capacity to affect us. In principle, if we're able to respond to its archetypal root, the interconnection can occur irrespective of the cultural form in which it arises. The significant breakthrough Jung made was to recognize the universality of the archetypes that lay beneath their cultural differences. Indeed, when we look at wrathful deities within Tantra, recognizing the presence and universality of an underlying archetype can help understand their meaning. For instance, the Buddhist deity Rukachakra and Samvara has a similar archetypal root to the Hindu Shiva, Greek Dionysius, and Celtic Cernunnos. That's the stag-headed god there for Celts. The Dionysian cult was carried to India by the Greeks in 200 before Christ, BCE, and may well have had associations with Shaivism, I should say, and the Tantras. The Hellenistic art of the Greeks also shaped the iconographical depictions of peaceful deities in Buddhist art, many of which were based on the youthful form of Apollo. This occurred during the Greek colonization of parts of India soon after the Buddha's lifetime. If we're familiar with particular cultural identity of an archetype, this may cloud our capacity to respond to it in a different form. Images of Christ and the Virgin Mary, for instance, are predominantly white Caucasian when depicted in paintings and sculpture. A more Middle Eastern depiction may provoke resistance. A further characteristic, particular Western taste in archetypal forms, is our tendency to respond to images that are human rather than stylized godlike images of the East. We tend to create gods in our own image, wanting to humanize them. This might be because Christians, we always say the Semitic thing that we are created in God's image. So the humanism of the Semitic traditions, right? We tend to create gods in our own image, wanting to humanize them. Perhaps we want them to reflect our value as humans so that we reclaim some of the power we once gave to the gods. And I said, like with Tantric Buddhism, it's uh, sort of anti-humanism in the sense that these deities aren't human and even a lot of times don't even look human, right? So it's hard for us in the West where we have such a humanistic tradition in Christianity, Islam, and in Judaism to really relate to that. So, okay, if you find Eastern images hard to relate to, it may be worth asking yourself where you sense the source of reaction or resistance might be. Is it simply that the images do not come from your own culture, and this cultural preconditioning is unnecessarily limiting your ability to respond to a deeper universal significance? If this is so, it can be difficult to move beyond unless you're willing to explore tantric practice and actually experience the quality of the deity. Simply changing the deity to suit Western taste is not a solution. At one point in my work as a Thangka or Buddhist painter, I attempted to give some of the deity's Western characteristics, clothing, ornaments, and so on. The effect, in my opinion, was dreadful. Rather than creating an image that inspired me, I felt that I'd somehow degraded the power of the image by trying to impose my human relativity onto it. I felt I was bringing the sacred down to the profane level rather than opening to its divinity. The Tantric text described the deity as having a body of light without bone structure, muscles, or solidity that give it a sense of gravity. Humanizing the deities did not enhance their numinosity. If we do not change the form of the deity, how might somebody who finds these images difficult begin to open up to them? This leads to a further question. Can an inner relationship with a deity given to us externally grow through meditation practice? So I'll just leave it right there. I sort of this is a very, very good. I could keep reading here, but I think I just should recommend people actually read the whole package of passions here. All these tantric forms are given to higher people in tantric visions or divine visions. So they're sort of how the deity wants to be approached or seen. But at the same time, we have to make these forms resonate with us. So we can say that Buddhists have a Sambhogakaya form, but at the same time a Nirmanakaya form where they can appear as whatever they need to as a way of teaching and helping us. So I'm just going to leave it there. My Jungian psychotherapist gave me great advice because I was trying to wonder about working with archetypes and problems. And she said, don't try to fix this problem, but leave it open because all these contrary issues, that's the alchemy. That's the lead that'll be turned into gold. In other words, don't let your intellectual, rational self try and smooth this over, but leave it open-ended and messy because that's the process that'll work. That's sort of the alchemical process itself. So I'm going to finish the class here and leave everything open-ended because this is sort of the struggle. This is the creative work. This is the process, right? Are these things to be kept the same? Are they to be changed? How do we understand universal forms? How are universal forms particularized in our own individual experience? Everyone has their own work to do with this. Everyone will get their own answers. There we go. We'll leave it sort of the Jungian open-ended, ambiguous answer to the end of the class here. So thank you so much. So before I just dedicate here, this marks the end of this section. So the next section we'll do a question and answer and a sharing in a week's time before we move into the vessel or alchemical part of the text on page, which one is page 61 here. Okay, so that's this one section complete. We'll do a question and answer next. So thank you so much for coming, and let's just dedicate this for the blessings of all holy beings, the truth of karma, the power of our pure bodhicitta intention. May all of our dharma wishes be fulfilled. Okay, thank you so much. I'll just press stop here, and there we go.